Welcome back to the deep dive. We're digging into something, well, huge today. It's happening right now, all over the globe, and honestly, almost no one seems to be talking about it in depth.
That's right. And this isn't just, some minor tech update or tweaking the bureaucracy.
No, not at all. Our sources are suggesting this is really fundamental, a kind of technological and policy shift that could completely change how you interact with your money, your government, even your basic rights.
It's one of those things presented with promises, right? Convenience, better security, getting everyone included. But the potential downside, the potential cost, could be this kind of unprecedented control.
Exactly. So our mission today on this deep dive is to really unpack it. What is a digital ID, actually? How fast is it being rolled out? Because the speed is kind of startling.
And crucially, what are the real implications, especially, for your financial life, your freedom to move around, your privacy, all those big things?
Okay, let's kick off with something concrete, a real policy example, just to show the stakes right away. Bit of a shocker, maybe? Look at the UK.
Ah, yes. The UK example is, well, stark.
Sources are pointing to the government's plan there.
Mm.
They want to make a digital ID, free of charge, mind you, but mandatory. Mandatory if you want the right to work.
Yeah.
And they want this done by the end of the current parliament.
And we really need to let that sink in. Mandatory for work.
Yeah.
Think about what that means. It's a fundamental line being drawn. Essentially, you will not be able to hold down a job legally in the UK if you don't have this specific digital ID.
It changes everything, doesn't it? It's not just a convenient option anymore.
No, it becomes a gatekeeper, a non-negotiable requirement just for basic economic survival, getting a job, renting a place to live. It suddenly all hinges on this one digital key.
Which is exactly why the warnings we're seeing around this whole global trend are, well, pretty extreme.
Extremely strong language, yeah.
One person we sourced, looking at how fast this is being pushed from the top down, they actually called it turnkey totalitarianism.
Wow, turnkey totalitarianism. That's
Probably
pretty blunt.
It is. And they suggest this whole digital ID infrastructure, it's basically laying the groundwork for, like, global medical surveillance, total control over whether you can access services, participate in society.
Now, look, that might sound like hyperbole to some people listening, like something out of a dystopian movie.
Right, it sounds extreme.
But when you look at the global context, the sheer scale and the speed of this rollout, well, that warning becomes pretty hard to just dismiss out of hand.
You mentioned the global scale. Let's talk about that synchronization. It's not just one or two countries trying this out.
No, absolutely not. That's what's so striking. This isn't just a few isolated pilot programs. It feels like a coordinated global push, a blitz, really.
How many countries are we talking about?
Our sources say over 100 countries, over 100. They either already have a national digital ID program up and running, or they're actively building one right now.
And the speed?
Unprecedented. The number of countries with these national programs has apparently doubled just in the last 10 years. Doubled.
Wow. And who's behind this big push? It's not just happening organically, is it?
No, definitely not spontaneously bubbling up from the grassroots. You've got some real heavy hitters involved internationally, giving it legitimacy, pushing it forward.
Very cool.
Well, the United Nations, for starters, they've set this very clear, very ambitious goal. It's part of their sustainable development goals, actually. They want legal identity for all by 2030.
Legal identity for all. And digital ID is seen as the way to achieve that.
It's positioned as the key tool, yeah. And then you have the major financial and sort of global governance bodies backing it. Think the World Economic Forum. Think the World Bank.
Okay, so the big players.
The really big players. They're often framing this digital ID as like essential infrastructure,
Yeah.
For global trade, for financial access, for modernizing economies.
But when you have that kind of alignment, governments, the UN, huge financial institutions, all pushing in the same direction.
It creates this powerful feeling of inevitability, doesn't it? Like it's just going to happen, which might explain why, the public debate, the critical discussion hasn't really caught up with how fast the policy is actually moving on the ground.
Okay, so let's slow down a bit and define our terms properly as we get into the details here. What exactly is a digital ID? Because I think most people, when they hear that, they just picture like scanning their driver's license and saving it to their phone's wallet.
Yeah, that's the common idea, but it's really quite a bit more than that. The tech is way more sophisticated, and what it can do is much broader.
So what is it then? Properly defined.
Okay, so a digital ID, or DD, is basically a secure electronic way to prove who you are online and increasingly offline too. It's usually built around a special app on your smartphone. Sometimes it might be a physical card with a chip, but the app is becoming the standard.
And who verifies the information in this app?
That's key. It's verified by what they call a trusted authority. And 9 times out of 10, that trusted authority is either the government itself or maybe a large tech company that the government has approved or partnered with. And it's not static, like a physical card. It can be updated.
Right. So if it's more than just a picture, what makes the technology underneath so different from me just showing my plastic license?
Yeah.
Because understanding that difference seems crucial to understanding the potential risks.
Absolutely crucial. The main technical differences are really about the data being used, how it's constantly checked, and the level of encryption involved.
Okay.
These modern DIDs, they lean heavily on biometric data, meaning things that are unique to you, facial recognition scans, maybe iris scans from your eye, fingerprints, that kind of biological marker.
Okay, got it.
And then they take that biometric data and combine it with really strong cryptographic encryption, the kind of stuff used in high-security communications.
And the idea is?
The idea is that this combination makes it, theoretically at least, much, much harder to fake or steal or compromise compared to the physical card. You know, a plastic card can be lost, copied, the photo swapped. These are supposed to be intrinsically linked to you.
You mentioned reusability earlier, too. That sounds important. How does that work, and why is it such a big selling point and maybe a pivot point for concern?
Right, reusability. So once your identity is properly verified digitally, maybe you have to go to a government office once, show your documents, get your biometrics scanned after that initial setup. The ID becomes reusable across potentially thousands of different services or applications.
So no more pulling out your documents every single time.
Exactly. You don't have to keep handing over physical papers or cards. The convenience feature they really push is something called selective sharing or selective disclosure.
Selective sharing, what does that mean?
It means the app is designed so it can share only the specific piece of information needed for a particular transaction, rather than showing your entire ID card with all your details.
Okay, give me an example. How would that work in practice?
Sure. Let's say you're buying alcohol or something age-restricted. With your physical ID, you show the whole card game, address, date of birth, everything.
Right.
With the digital ID app using selective sharing, you'd maybe tap your phone on a scanner, and the app wouldn't necessarily show the cashier your name or address. It would just send a cryptographically secured message back to the scanner saying, essentially, yes, this identity is verified by the trusted authority, and yes, the holder is over 21.
Okay, so on the surface, that sounds like more privacy because you're sharing less data in that specific moment.
That's exactly how it's sold, enhanced privacy through data minimization. But, and this is the critical pivot you mentioned, the mechanism that makes this possible is centralization.
Oh, so?
Because for that selective sharing to work, for the system to trust that, yes, over 21 message, it has to be constantly checking back or verifiable against that single trusted central authority, the government or the approved company that issued the ID.
Ah, okay. So every time you use it, even for something minor.
It potentially logs that interaction back at the central hub. It creates a single point of verification, yes, but also a single point of potential failure, a single point of surveillance, and ultimately a single point of control.
And that single point of control, that infrastructure, it's being built out incredibly fast all over the world. Let's look at the rollout status. Europe seems like a good place to start. They often move as a block on these things.
They certainly have on this. Europe has been very decisive, framing it as, essential modernization for the digital single market. They passed a specific law. It's called ES 2.0.
ES 2.0.
And what does that do?
It mandates, it's not optional, it mandates that all 27 EU member countries have to roll out a national digital ID wallet for their citizens by 2026.
By 2026, that's really soon.
Very soon. It's a legal requirement across the bloc.
And what's this EU wallet supposed to do? What's the vision for it?
Well, the marketing pitch is basically a universal login for life in Europe.
Universal login for life.
Yeah. So the idea is that EU citizens will use this one single government-backed app to do pretty much everything. Log into their bank account, file taxes online, access government services, access private services that require ID, sign legal documents electronically, maybe even store health records or prescriptions.
Wow. And it works across borders.
That's the key selling point, interoperability. It's designed from the ground up to work seamlessly whether you're in France, Germany, Spain, anywhere in the EU, one app recognized everywhere.
Okay, what about the U.S.? It's usually more fragmented there. No single national ID card traditionally.
True, the U.S. doesn't have that same top-down mandate yet, but the components are being put in place very rapidly at the state level.
How so?
Well, our sources say at least 25 states already have some form of digital driver's license program up and running. You can use these for certain things, like maybe getting through airport security faster with TSA PreCheck or proving your identity at some state agency.
95 states already.
Yep, and apparently another 20 or so are actively developing similar programs right now. So it's spreading fast, state by state.
So a kind of bottom-up approach leading towards eventual integration.
It looks that way. And it's important not to ignore the federal push either. Even though there isn't one single national ID app yet, President Biden did issue an executive order promoting the adoption of digital identity solutions across federal agencies. That signals the direction things are heading. The infrastructure is definitely being layered in.
Okay, so Europe and the U.S. are moving fast. What about other key parts of the world? Any major examples?
Oh, absolutely. You see massive adoption in key global hubs, places that often set trends in technology integration. Look at South Korea.
What's happening there?
They launched a new digital ID app just this year, and apparently it's already largely replaced physical cards for almost all banking and financial transactions. It's become the default way to interact with money.
Just like that. Wow.
Then you look at places like Singapore. Their SingPass system, which is a national digital ID, is already used by over 4.5 million people. That's a huge chunk of their population. And they use it for basically all government interactions and increasingly for private sector stuff too. Banking, accessing buildings, you name it.
So it becomes the master key for everything.
Pretty much. And the UAE is another big example. They have the UAE Pass. That single digital ID is connected to over 5,000 different services now.
5,000? Like what?
Everything from paying your utility bills, signing legal contracts digitally, accessing healthcare portals, all through that one verified digital identity. And then you have massive national programs rolling out in places like Nigeria, aiming to give every single citizen a unique digital ID number linked to biometrics. The groundwork being laid globally is just extensive. It's really deep.
Okay, so the rollout is global, it's fast, and it's backed by major players. But if you ask the governments or the UN why they're doing this with such urgency, what's the story they tell? They're not going to say control or surveillance, are they?
No, absolutely not. Which brings us to, the official narrative, the sales pitch.
Right.
And they focus relentlessly, very consistently, on a three-part message. It's all about convenience, security, and inclusion.
Convenience, security, inclusion. Okay, let's break those down. Because they are selling solutions to real problems, aren't they?
They absolutely are. And we need to understand those stated benefits properly before we can really dig into the potential downsides.
Okay, benefit number one, fraud prevention. That seems like a big one.
Huge. Identity theft, financial fraud, it costs the global economy, hundreds of billions every year? And let's be honest, traditional documents, paper certificates, even plastic cards with magnetic stripes, they are relatively easy to fake or steal or tamper with.
So the argument is digital is safer.
The official argument is yes. By using these layers of security, the strong encryption we talked about, the constant verification, checking back with the source, and crucially, the biometrics that are unique to you, the digital ID becomes, in theory, much harder to compromise. So the promise is a significant cut in identity theft and financial crime.
Okay, makes sense on paper. What's the second big benefit they push?
Inclusion. This is often framed in very humanitarian terms. They talk about the billion people problem.
The billion people problem.
Yeah, sources estimate that almost 1 billion people worldwide, mostly in developing countries, lack any form of official, legal, state-issued identification. No birth certificate, no national ID card, nothing.
And why is that such a big deal? What can't they do?
Well, without a formal ID, you're effectively locked out of the formal economy and many aspects of civic life. You often can't open a bank account. You probably can't vote. You might not be able to legally own property or a business. And critically, you often can't access essential government services, things like healthcare benefits, education programs, social support. You're invisible to the system.
Yeah, so DIDs are presented as the solution to bring these people into the fold.
Exactly. The World Bank, the UN, they position digital IDs as the essential tool to onboard this massive chunk of the global population, to give them a legal identity security, allow them to access financial services, participate in the digital economy, and ultimately achieve, greater stability and sustainable development.
That sounds incredibly positive. I mean, helping a billion people get access sounds great. But hang on, how do the official narratives address the cost? If you're one of those billion people, likely living in poverty, how are you supposed to afford the expensive smartphone and the reliable internet connection you'd need to actually use this digital ID? Doesn't that create a new barrier?
That is the absolute critical tension, isn't it? And it's a point that's very often glossed over in the glossy brochures and the official statements.
Right.
While the digital ID app might be offered free of charge, the underlying infrastructure required to use it, a reasonably modern, secure smartphone capable of running the app and handling biometrics, plus consistent, affordable internet access that's definitely not free.
So it could actually exclude the very people it's meant to help.
That's the major concern raised by civil liberties groups and digital rights advocates. A system designed, or at least marketed, for universal access might, in practice, end up further marginalizing the poorest, the elderly, people in remote areas with poor connectivity, or those who simply aren't tech-savvy. It risks creating a digital divide within the inclusion agenda itself.
Okay, that's a really important counterpoint. What's the third pillar of the official narrative?
Efficiency. This one is aimed more at governments and maybe corporations. The argument is that DDs will save enormous amounts of time and money by slashing paperwork and bureaucracy.
Like no more standing in line at the DMV for hours.
That's the dream they sell, yeah. No more mailing in forms, no more manual processing. Everything becomes instant, digitized, streamlined.
Is there a country they point to as proof this works?
Estonia is always the poster child for this. They were pioneers in e-government and digital ID. Apparently, they now handle something like 99% of all their public services completely digitally.
99%.
Yeah, everything from voting online, accessing health records, filing taxes, almost everything. And the reports claim that this digital efficiency saves Estonia's government around 2% of the country's entire GDP every single year.
2% of GDP.
Yeah.
That's a huge saving. That would get any finance minister's attention.
Absolutely. It's a very compelling statistic if you're a government looking to modernize, cut administrative costs, and appear efficient.
And the final piece of the official story is that interoperability thing you mentioned,
Yeah.
especially in Europe.
Right. Interoperability. That's the big promise, particularly for the EU wallet. The idea that this single digital ID will let you seamlessly move and operate across all 27 member states.
So a traveler could use the same app too.
To prove their identity at a border, pay taxes if they work in another member state, register a business across borders, maybe even rent a bike in a foreign city using the same verified app. It's presented as this key enabler for a truly integrated digital single market. The UN goes even further, calling this kind of standardized, interoperable global system the key to sustainable development.
Okay, so if you just listen to that official pitch, better security, efficiency saving billions, helping the world's poorest get included, seamless travel.
It sounds completely benign, doesn't it? Even profoundly beneficial. It's marketed as this universal passport for navigating the complexities of the modern digital world. Makes life easier for everyone.
What's really fascinating is comparing that smooth, positive official story with the actual media coverage, or maybe the lack of it, especially when these policies start becoming mandatory, like that UK right-to-work example.
Yeah, we looked into the coverage around headlines like UK digital ID needed to prove right to work and rent. And what really stood out was, well, a strange consensus combined with a general lack of public traction.
What do you mean?
It was striking because on this specific issue, outlets from both the left and the right of the political spectrum actually seemed to agree that the mandatory digital ID was a bad idea, that it posed significant risks.
Really? Left and right agreed.
On the core danger, yes. We saw left-leaning sources arguing it was a major threat to privacy and personal freedoms, and also that it wouldn't actually stop illegal working anyway. And then right-leaning sources were also arguing that it was a fundamental infringement on citizen privacy and autonomy. They were basically aligned on the civil liberties threat.
That's rare. So you'd expect a huge public debate.
You would, wouldn't you? But it didn't really happen. The topic flared up briefly around the headlines, but then it just failed to gain widespread, sustained public attention or political momentum. It seemed to exist in this weird political blind spot.
And what about the mainstream centrist media outlets? How do they frame it?
By and large, they tended to frame it much more neutrally, more like an administrative upgrade, a modernization effort. They'd emphasize the government's stated goals of streamlining processes, maybe mention the fraud angle, but generally with very little critical analysis of the underlying power dynamics or the privacy concerns that both the left and right were raising.
So the serious warnings from critics got sidelined.
Pretty much. The consensus among activists and commentators that this represented a really significant potential threat to basic freedoms was largely treated as less important than the government's narrative about IT upgrades and efficiency. And that dismissal, that failure to really grapple with the power implications, is deeply concerning.
Yeah, that definitely is. And it leads us perfectly into the next part of our discussion, the hidden risks. We've seen the glossy brochure, the official promises. Now let's look at the fine print, the potential dark side.
Because the core concern, the thing that keeps coming up in critical analyses, is this. The very same features that make these digital IDs so convenient, the centralization, the real-time verification, the interoperability across different parts of your life,
Right.
those are precisely the features that can be abused.
Right. Convenience and control are two sides of the same coin here.
Exactly. When you funnel everyone's identity, everyone's access through one single centralized system, you inevitably centralize the power to track, to monitor, and ultimately to control.
So let's break down that potential for abuse. You mentioned three main areas.
Yeah, we can think about it in terms of three overlapping spheres where this centralized power could be problematic. First, there's government power, especially the risk of financial weaponization. Second, there's corporate power and the creation of what some call a super cookie tracking your entire life. And third, there are the massive risks around surveillance and the security of all that centralized data.
Okay, let's tackle government power first. Financial weaponization, that sounds pretty ominous. Where's the clearest example of that happening already?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have to look far. China provides a very immediate, very stark case study of what happens when digital identity is fully merged with state control mechanisms.
Their social credit system.
Precisely. Just this past summer, China officially launched its national digital ID app. And crucially, they didn't just launch it as a standalone ID, they immediately and seamlessly integrated it with their existing and quite notorious social credit system.
So your digital ID in China isn't just proving who you are.
No, it's much more than that. It's intrinsically linked to your social credit score. And that score is dynamic. It changes based on your behavior, your financial transactions, your travel history, whether you pay your bills on time, even, chillingly, your online activities and what you say publicly or privately.
Okay, so what happens if your score drops? What are the real-world consequences enforced through this digital ID?
The enforcement is designed to be immediate and automated. If the system flags you as non-compliant, maybe you criticize the government online, maybe you defaulted on a loan, maybe you just associated with someone the state considers undesirable. The consequences can be applied swiftly through the digital ID system.
Like what kind of consequences?
It can mean real restrictions on your life. You might find you're banned from buying plane or high-speed train tickets. You might be restricted from purchasing certain goods or accessing certain services. You could even be denied access to social benefits or government jobs. The sources we looked at provided some really specific, quite chilling anecdotes of this in action.
Could you share one of those? Something concrete.
Yeah. There was a widely reported case of a journalist. He had been involved in a defamation lawsuit or an attempted one against him. He later tried to buy a high-speed train ticket, and the system simply wouldn't let him. His digital ID was flagged, blacklisting him from that form of travel.
And he didn't know until he tried to buy the ticket.
Exactly. The sanction was applied silently, automatically, through the link systems. Because his digital identity was tied to the travel booking system, the ban was instantaneous. There was no need for a human official to intervene, no lengthy court process. Just score drops, access denied.
That's terrifying speed and lack of recourse. Any other examples?
Well, there were reports during certain periods where citizens who hadn't received a government-mandated vaccine suddenly found they couldn't use public transport. Their digital ID, linked to their real-time health status, simply wouldn't let them through the turnstiles. Again, automatic enforcement based on linked data.
And you mentioned financial weaponization specifically. How does that work?
Even more directly in some cases. The system is designed to identify non-compliance, maybe an unpaid fine, or failing to fulfill some social obligation determined by the algorithm and then execute financial penalties automatically. There are reports, for instance, of money being directly deducted from people's linked digital payment accounts like WeChat Pay or Alipay without needing explicit permission for that specific deduction. The fine is assessed by the system linked to your ID, and the money is just taken.
Wow, just automatically debited based on your social score.
That level of automated financial punishment is really only possible when you have that single centralized digital identity acting as the master key to all your financial interactions. We've even heard really distressing reports about elderly people being denied access to their pensions or subsidized food because, for whatever reason, the biometric scanners, the fingerprint readers failed to recognize them. If the system can't verify you instantly, you just lose access. Full stop.
Okay. China is obviously an extreme example of an authoritarian state.
Mm-hmm.
But the critical question for people listening in, say, Europe or North America is,
Yeah.
could this kind of financial control happen in Western democracies? Are there precedents that show the technology itself, not just the political system, enables this kind of abuse?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, our sources suggest, yes, there are clear warning signs and precedents, even in countries with strong democratic traditions.
Such as?
Look at Canada back in 2022 during the Freedom Convoy protests.
Right, I remember that.
The Canadian government invoked emergency powers, powers that were really designed for wartime or massive national security threats, and they used those powers to order banks to freeze the accounts of people associated with the protests.
That wasn't just the organizers, was it?
No, that's the crucial part. It included ordinary citizens, people who hadn't broken any laws, who had simply donated relatively small amounts of money, maybe $50 or $100, through platforms like GoFundMe to support the protesters' cause. Their bank accounts were frozen.
Let's just pause on that. Donating to a cause the government opposed through a public platform, and within hours, potentially, your access to your own money, your entire economic life could be cut off.
Instantly. And critically, this was done without any trials, without court orders against those specific individuals, without anyone being convicted of any actual crime. Their offense, in the eyes of the government using those emergency powers, was simply supporting a cause deemed unacceptable. Financial exclusion as a tool of political pressure.
Any other examples like that?
There was a similar situation reported more recently in Georgia. Amnesty International highlighted cases where the government allegedly froze the bank accounts of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and even lawyers. And why? Because they were providing legal aid and support to people protesting against controversial government policies.
So providing legal help became grounds for financial sanction.
According to the reports, yes. Again, the mechanism was used to cut off financial lifelines, essentially trying to silence dissent or opposition by making it impossible for these groups to operate or for individuals to support them.
And you mentioned that existing laws might actually make this easier to do, even without a full-blown digital ID system yet. Something about anti-money laundering.
Yes, this is the really insidious part, the quiet enabler. Existing anti-money laundering, AML, and counter-terrorist financing, CTF laws, are already on the books globally. And these laws require banks and financial institutions to monitor transactions and to report, flag, or even freeze accounts involved in suspicious activity.
Okay, but suspicious activity sounds vague.
It is incredibly vague, and that's the problem. What counts as suspicious or unusual activity is often poorly defined in the law itself and can be interpreted very broadly by the financial institution, often based on government guidance or risk assessments.
So how could that ambiguity be exploited, especially once digital IDs are widespread?
Well, today, suspicious activity might genuinely be about large, unexplained cash deposits or transfers to high-risk jurisdictions. But think about the future. If your entire financial life, your spending habits, your political donations, your social connections are all linked through a centralized digital ID, the definition of suspicious could easily expand.
To include?
Could it include transferring money to buy cryptocurrency? Maybe. Donating to a protest movement the government doesn't like? Potentially. Participating in a boycott against a major corporation that has government ties? Who knows? The critical point is that under many current AML frameworks, mere suspicion, not proven illegality confirmed by a court, can be enough for a bank to be obligated or pressured to freeze your account or cut off your access.
And the digital ID makes that freeze instant and unavoidable.
Exactly. If that single digital ID is the only way you can access your money, pay for things, receive income, then a freeze based on suspicion becomes an immediate and potentially devastating form of control, with very little immediate recourse for the individual caught in the net.
Wow. Okay, that's sobering. Let's shift gears now to the second area of power you mentioned, corporate power, and this idea of the super cookie. What's that about?
Right, so this moves the focus from government control to, let's say, market exploitation and corporate surveillance. We're already seeing big companies, think Amazon, Uber, major airlines, retailers starting to experiment with accepting digital IDs for verification or access.
Makes sense for them. Streamlines things.
It does, but the concern is what happens when these DIDs become the standard, maybe even the only way you interact with these services. The ID stops being just a way to prove you are who you say you are, and it starts functioning as this incredibly powerful, persistent tracking mechanism.
Like a web browser cookie, but for your whole life.
Exactly like that, hence the term supercookie. Website cookies track your browsing history across different sites to build a profile for targeted advertising. Imagine that concept applied to your entire real-world existence, linked to your immutable identity via the DID. Tracking where you physically go, every time you use the ID to enter a building or use transport, what you buy, linking transactions directly to your ID, what services you use, maybe even integrating data from your health trackers or smart home devices eventually. It creates this incredibly detailed, unified profile of your life accessible to corporations.
And the nightmare scenario here is how this data interacts with dynamic pricing.
That's where it gets really concerning for consumers. Dynamic pricing is already happening, of course.
Yeah, airlines, hotels, Uber surge pricing.
Right. Prices change constantly based on perceived demand, time of day, maybe your past purchase history on that specific platform. It's designed to maximize profit for the seller by charging each customer the maximum they might be willing to pay at that moment.
So how does the digital ID supercharge this?
It gives the pricing algorithms access to a vastly richer, more personal data set about you, the potential customer, in real time.
Yeah.
Data points they mostly don't have now.
Like what?
Your precise current location, maybe even your current heart rate or stress level if it's linked to a health tracker, your recent travel history. Your confirmed identity means they can link your current interaction to your entire past purchase history across multiple platforms, not just their own. Maybe even, indirectly, a sense of your current bank balance or credit limit.
Okay, paint a picture. Use that airport example you mentioned earlier.
Okay, so imagine you've just landed after a long delayed flight. The system knows this because your digital ID is linked to your airline booking.
Right.
It knows you're inside the airport terminal. Maybe your linked smartwatch indicates a higher heart rate stress. You walk up to a food vendor. The vendor system pings your ID. The dynamic pricing algorithm instantly assesses, okay, this person is likely tired, hungry, stressed, probably less price sensitive right now, and they have a history of paying for convenience. So the price for that sandwich that's normally, say, $12, dynamically adjusts for you right there at the point of sale to $25 because the algorithm calculates that's the maximum you're likely willing to pay in your current state.
While the person next to me might pay less.
Exactly. If the person next to you, maybe an airport employee whose ID flags them as such, or someone who just arrived on a short, non-delayed flight and whose profile suggests they always compare prices, the algorithm might show them the standard $12 price or even a discount. It's hyper-personalized pricing based on exploiting your perceived needs and vulnerabilities in real time.
The information asymmetry is just total. The seller knows everything. You know nothing about why the price is what it is.
Precisely. Or consider another scenario based more on desire. Let's say your digital ID profile, aggregated from search history, social media links, past purchases, shows you've been desperately searching for Taylor Swift tickets all week.
Okay, getting slightly worried.
You finally find a site selling them that accepts your digital ID for verification. The pricing algorithm sees your high intent, your past history of paying premium prices for similar events. It instantly bumps up the price you see compared to someone whose profile shows only casual interest or who is flagged as a bargain hunter.
So my enthusiasm costs me money automatically.
Potentially, yes. It moves beyond supply and demand for the product to pricing based on your specific individual demand profile.
And this isn't just about sandwiches and concert tickets, is it? It could affect essential services too, like insurance.
Oh, absolutely. Insurance is a prime candidate for this kind of hyper-personalization nightmare. Right now, insurance companies rely on pretty broad categories to assess risk and set your premiums right. Your age group, your zip code, the type of car you drive.
Yeah, fairly crude demographic buckets.
But imagine if your mandatory digital ID is linked to, say, the telematics data from your connected car, how fast you drive, how hard you brake, your ride-sharing history from Uber and Lyft, how often you travel late at night, maybe even data from your health app or grocery purchases, predicting health risks. The insurance company could move beyond broad categories to using your exact real-time individualized data stream to calculate your premium dynamically. If the algorithm flags you as taking slightly more risks this month based on your driving patterns or where you've been hanging out, your premium could go up instantly at the next renewal. or even midterm.
And there's no arguing with the algorithm.
Your negotiation leverage basically disappears. The system knows your precise calculated risk profile likely better than you do yourself. How do you argue against that data? It's a massive shift in power towards the corporation.
Okay, this is getting quite dystopian. Let's move to the third area you outlined, surveillance and security risks. Beyond the corporate tracking, what are the direct surveillance implications?
Well, building on that idea of the system knowing where you are, there's the phone home feature that some critics are really worried about.
Phone home, what does that mean?
It means that many of these digital identity systems aren't just passive tools you show when needed. They're designed to be actively communicating back to a central database pretty frequently.
Even when I just use it at, say, a bar.
Potentially, yes. We know that some of the digital driver's license apps currently being used in the US have this capability. Every time the ID is scanned and verified, whether it's at airport security, a hotel check-in, entering a government building, maybe even buying age-restricted goods, it doesn't just do a local check. It can ping back to a central government database.
And why is it designed to do that? What's the official reason?
Ostensibly, it's for security and maintaining data integrity, to make sure the ID hasn't been reported stolen or revoked since the last time it was checked, to instantly update any information if needed, real-time validity.
But the consequence?
The consequence, intended or not, is that the entity running that central database, usually the government, potentially gets a time-stamped, geolocated, real-time log of everywhere you go and everything you do that requires your ID to be checked.
So a detailed map of your life assembled automatically.
A surveillance network of unprecedented scope and granularity created as a byproduct of needing to verify identity for everyday activities. It goes way beyond just knowing who you are.
And this constant logging, combined with the identity verification, leads us back to that idea of programmable money, doesn't it? Creating the ultimate tool for control.
It really feels like the potential end game, the convergence point for all these technologies. If you combine these mandatory, universally used digital IDs with the central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, that dozens of central banks around the world are actively researching and piloting right now.
Oh, you get
the very real possibility of programmable money.
Okay, define that connection clearly. How does the DID enable programmable money issued by a central bank?
Right. So a CBDC isn't like Bitcoin. It's digital currency issued directly by the state's central bank. And crucially, unlike cash, it can be designed with rules embedded in the currency itself.
Rules? Like what?
Rules about how, where, and when it can be spent. But for those rules to be enforced, the system needs to know definitively who is spending the money and who is receiving it in every single transaction.
And the digital ID provides that link.
The mandatory biometric government-verified digital ID provides that universal, unavoidable, non-repudiable link between the digital currency and the specific individual using it. It closes the loop.
So what could that mean in practice? Money that only works for certain things.
Exactly. Your digital dollars tied to your unique biometric ID could theoretically be programmed to simply not work if you try to buy something the government disapproves of, maybe cigarettes or alcohol if you're deemed a health risk, maybe fuel if there are carbon restrictions, maybe specific books or media.
Or restricted to only certain things.
Yes. The money could be programmed so it's only valid for spending on essentials like rent or approved groceries. Or perhaps most drastically, the money could be programmed with an expiry date.
Money that expires.
To force spending and stimulate the economy during a downturn, perhaps? If your digital money disappears from your account, if you don't spend it by the end of the month, you're certainly going to spend it. All these rules, all this control could be applied instantly, universally, at the discretion of the authorities, because the DID links the programmable money directly and inescapably to you.
That's a staggering level of potential control over individual economic freedom.
It really is. It changes the fundamental nature of money itself.
Okay, beyond the control aspects, what about the basic security of hoarding all this incredibly sensitive data in one place? The data breach risk must be enormous.
Absolutely enormous. And potentially irreversible. When you centralize the core identity data names, addresses, birth dates, financial links, and crucially biometrics for an entire nation or potentially billions of people globally, you create the ultimate honeypot.
A prime target for hackers.
The most valuable target imaginable for sophisticated criminal organizations, state-sponsored hacking groups, rogue states, everyone, and we already have examples of this going wrong.
Like where?
India's Aadhaar system. It's the world's largest digital ID program, covering over 1 billion people with unique ID numbers linked to fingerprints and iris scans.
And it's been breached.
It has suffered multiple significant data leaks over the years. Sensitive demographic data, and in some cases, even biometric information from hundreds of millions of people has been exposed. The scale is just mind-boggling.
And this is the critical point about biometric data, isn't it? Unlike a password.
You can't change it. That's the fundamental terrifying difference. If your password leaks, you reset it. It's inconvenient, but manageable. If your fingerprint scan, your facial geometry data, your iris pattern is stolen and sold on the dark web, that's it. It's compromised forever.
You can't get new fingerprints.
Exactly. That biometric marker is permanently vulnerable. Any future system that relies on that same biometric for security and more systems could potentially be accessed by whoever holds that stolen data. It creates a lifetime risk of identity theft and fraud that you simply cannot fix.
That permanent vulnerability is a massive, often downplayed risk.
Huge. And it creates this permanent potential for abuse by anyone who gets their hands on that data: criminals, corporations, foreign governments.
Okay, one last point on the risk side. Let's circle back to the justification often used, like in the UK, that mandatory DIDs are needed to stop illegal activity, like people working without the right permits. Does that argument actually hold up?
Well, it raises a very practical, almost cynical question, doesn't it? If the main goal is to stop people working illegally, why would a digital ID suddenly succeed where existing systems and checks have failed?
What do you mean?
Take the UK example again. People working there are already supposed to have a national insurance number. Employers are already legally required to check someone's right to work using existing documents.
Right.
If an employer is already willing to break those rules to hire someone off the books without doing the proper checks, maybe paying cash, why would the introduction of a mandatory digital ID suddenly make them compliant?
You still have to scan it, verify it, if they're already breaking a law.
Exactly. If an employer is determined to operate illegally, adding another layer of digital bureaucracy, one that requires them to actively scan and verify against a central system, seems unlikely to be a major deterrent. They'll just find ways around it or continue to ignore it, just like they ignore current rules.
So the argument is that it doesn't really solve the problem it claims to solve.
The argument is that it adds very little effective enforcement against those already determined to break the rules. But what it does achieve very effectively is create an unprecedented system of tracking, monitoring, and control over the vast majority of the population who are compliant, who do follow the rules.
So it mainly increases control over law-abiding citizens.
That's the fear expressed by many critics, that the entire system, while perhaps framed as targeting illegality, functions primarily as a mechanism to manage and control the compliant majority, tracking what they do, where they go, what they spend. It's less about catching criminals and more about managing citizens.
Okay, so bringing this all together, what does this mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of this rapid global shift?
Well, as we've seen, the core tension is crystal clear, isn't it? On one hand, these digital IDs genuinely do offer the potential for immense convenience. Think about smoother travel, quicker access to services, maybe less paperwork.
The benefits are real, at least on the surface.
They are. But on the other hand, this technology fundamentally and possibly irreversibly shifts the balance of power. Power moves away from the individual and concentrates dramatically in the hands of governments and the corporations that manage these systems.
Enabling levels of control that just weren't possible before.
Levels of control over your finances, your movement, your access to basic services that were previously unimaginable outside of, frankly, authoritarian regimes. The convenience, the inclusion, all those benefits are implicitly conditional.
Conditional on what?
Conditional on you staying in line. As one source put it, the convenience is guaranteed only as long as you don't get out of line or say something someone in power doesn't like.
That's the hidden cost, the fine print.
That's the potential trade-off we're sleepwalking into.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's leave our listeners with that final provocative thought, something to really chew on, maybe explore further themselves. Where do you want to point them?
I think it has to come back to that massive security risk, but maybe thinking longer term, more globally.
Okay.
We've talked about the data breaches, like Aadhaar, but think about the cumulative effect. Consider the absolute necessity for these huge centralized databases, national databases, holding the most intimate identity information, including those unchangeable biometrics, for potentially billions of people across the globe.
Right. These giant honeypots everywhere.
Now, ask yourself,
What are the true long-term global security implications if, or perhaps when, one or more of these massive national databases are successfully compromised? Not just by regular cybercriminals selling data, but by sophisticated state-sponsored hacking groups from rival nations, or by major international terrorist organizations.
What happens if China gets the biometric database for India, or Russia gets the EU's database, or vice versa?
Exactly. What are the consequences for global espionage, for future warfare, for destabilizing entire populations if one state actor holds the immutable biometric keys to millions or billions of citizens of another state? The potential for blackmail, manipulation, and identity-based attacks on a mass scale is, well, it's a national and international security threat that transcends the current debates about convenience versus privacy. It could reshape global power dynamics for decades. That's something we really need to start thinking about seriously.
That is definitely a sobering thought to end on. The long-term weaponization of stolen identity data on a global scale. Okay, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
If you found this insightful and maybe a bit concerning, please do subscribe, share it with others who need to know about this, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our future explorations of these crucial global financial and technological trends.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.